Thomas Walker stood at the edge of his ranch, watching the dust clouds rise from the cattle moving across the dry plains. The sun was setting over the Montana landscape, painting everything in shades of orange and red. At 32, he owned one of the largest ranches in the territory, but something was missing from his life. The big house felt empty. The silence during dinner made him realize how alone he truly was. His sister Margaret had been writing letters from back east, telling him about suitable women who might make good wives. But Thomas wasn't interested in arranged meetings or long courtships. He was a practical man who believed in getting things done quickly and efficiently. That's why when he saw the advertisement in the newspaper, it caught his attention immediately. The ad was simple and direct. Young woman seeks marriage to respectable gentleman. Willing to relocate? References available upon request. What made this different from other marriage advertisements was the location it came from. The woman lived in a small town called Silver Creek, just 2 days' ride from his ranch. She wasn't some stranger from thousands of miles away. Thomas wrote a letter that same evening. He described his ranch, his financial situation, and his desire for a wife who could handle frontier life. He mentioned that he was looking for partnership rather than romance. Someone who could help him build something lasting in the wild country. He sealed the letter and rode into town the next morning to mail it. 3 weeks later, a response arrived. The woman's name was Alina Rodriguez, and her letter was written in careful, flowing handwriting. She explained that her father had died recently, leaving her alone and in difficult circumstances. She needed security and was willing to marry a man she had never met if he was honest and kind. She asked for a photograph and promised to send one of herself. Thomas studied her letter multiple times. There was something about the way she wrote that impressed him. She didn't make grand promises or speak of love. Instead, she was practical and straightforward, qualities he admired. He arranged to have his photograph taken in town and sent it along with another letter describing his daily routine and expectations for a wife. When Elena's photograph arrived 2 weeks later, Thomas was surprised. The image showed a woman in a long, dark dress with a black veil covering most of her face. Only her eyes were visible, and they seemed sad but determined. In her accompanying letter, she explained that she was in mourning for her father and would continue wearing the veil for several more months. As was customary in her family's tradition, the correspondence continued for 2 months. Alina wrote about her life in Silver Creek, her skills in cooking and managing a household, and her willingness to adapt to ranch life. Thomas shared stories about his cattle, the challenges of frontier living, and his plans for expanding his property. Neither wrote about feelings or romance, but both seemed satisfied with the practical arrangement they were building. Finally, Thomas wrote the letter he had been working up to, a formal proposal of marriage. He suggested they meet in person first, but Elena's response surprised him. She wrote that, if he was truly serious about marriage, she would prefer to proceed with the ceremony immediately. She had no family left to provide a traditional wedding, and waiting would only make their situation more difficult. Thomas found himself agreeing. He arranged for the local preacher to perform the ceremony and sent Alina money for travel expenses. He cleaned his house thoroughly, hired a woman from town to help prepare a proper wedding meal, and bought new clothes for the occasion. The practical nature of the arrangement suited him, but as the day approached, he found himself nervous in a way he hadn't expected. Alina arrived on the Wednesday afternoon stage. Accompanied by a single trunk and a small carpet bag, Thomas waited at the station, recognizing her immediately, despite the heavy black veil that covered her face completely. She was smaller than he had expected, probably no taller than his shoulder. She moved with quiet dignity as she stepped down from the stage. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you for meeting me, Miss Rodriguez," Thomas replied, removing his hat. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." "It was manageable," Alina answered. "I am ready to proceed with our arrangement." Thomas helped her with her luggage and loaded it into his wagon. During the ride to his ranch, they spoke little. Alina looked around at the landscape with interest, but didn't comment on what she saw. Thomas pointed out landmarks and boundaries of his property, and she nodded politely. The conversation was formal and careful. like two business partners discussing a contract. The wedding took place that evening in Thomas's front parlor. The preacher, Mrs. Henderson from town, who had helped with preparations, and Elena's veil were the only witnesses. Elena kept her veil in place throughout the ceremony, speaking her vows in a clear, steady voice. Thomas found himself studying what he could see of her hands and the way she held herself, trying to understand the woman he was marrying. After the brief ceremony and simple meal, Mrs. Henderson returned to town, leaving Thomas and Elena alone in the big house. They stood in the parlor, suddenly awkward with each other. The practical correspondence and businesslike wedding hadn't prepared either of them for this moment of actually being married strangers. "I prepared the guest room for you," Thomas said finally. "I thought you might prefer your own space until we become more comfortable with each other." "That is very considerate," Lena replied. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness," they said goodnight formally. Thomas listened to her footsteps as she climbed the stairs to her room. He sat in his chair by the fireplace, smoking his pipe and wondering what he had gotten himself into. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, and he realized that his quiet, predictable life had just changed completely. Tomorrow would begin their new life together, but tonight was still alone with his thoughts, in a house that somehow felt even emptier than before. The next morning, Thomas woke to the smell of coffee and bacon cooking. He had been rising before dawn for years to start his ranch work, but he had never awakened to breakfast already being prepared. He dressed quickly and walked to the kitchen, where he found Elena moving efficiently around the stove. She wore the same black dress and veil from the day before, but she had wrapped an apron around her waist. "Good morning," she said, without turning around. "I hope you don't mind that I started breakfast. I couldn't sleep and thought I might as well make myself useful." "I don't mind at all," Thomas replied, surprised by how natural she seemed in his kitchen. "I usually just make coffee and eat some bread before heading out to check the cattle." It's not enough food for a man who works hard all day," Elena said, placing a plate in front of him. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crispy, and she had even made biscuits that were still warm from the oven. "A proper breakfast will give you strength for your work." Thomas ate in silence, watching Elena move around the kitchen. Despite the veil covering her face, she seemed to know exactly where everything was located. She had obviously explored the house while he was sleeping. Her movements were graceful and confident, suggesting she was accustomed to managing a household. "What would you like me to do while you're working with the cattle?" Elena asked as she cleared his empty plate. "I noticed the vegetable garden needs attention, and some of the curtains could use washing." Thomas hadn't expected her to jump into ranch work so quickly. Most women he knew took time to adjust to frontier life, but Elena seemed ready to begin immediately. "The garden would be helpful," he said. "I haven't had time to maintain it properly." "There are tools in the barn if you need them." "I'll find what I need," Elena replied. "What time do you usually return for dinner?" "Around sunset," Thomas answered. "But don't feel obligated to cook every meal. I'm used to simple food. I prefer to stay busy," Elena said. "Cooking and managing the house will give me purpose." Thomas left for his daily work feeling strangely unsettled. Having another person in his house was taking some adjustment, especially someone he knew nothing about beyond their brief correspondence. Elena was polite and efficient, but the veil made it impossible to read her expressions or understand what she was thinking. When he returned that evening, the house had been transformed. The windows sparkled, the floors had been scrubbed, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Elena had spent the day cleaning and organizing, making the place feel more like a home than it had in years. The vegetable garden showed signs of her attention too. With weeds removed and rows straightened, dinner was roast chicken with vegetables from the garden. Better than anything Thomas had eaten in months. Elena served the meal and sat across from him at the table, but she ate very little. Thomas realized this was because of the veil, which made eating difficult and awkward. "Elena," he said carefully, "you don't have to wear the veil when we're alone in the house. I understand it's part of your morning customs. But I don't want you to be uncomfortable during meals." "Thank you for the consideration," Lena replied, "but I prefer to maintain the custom for now. I can manage." Thomas didn't push the issue, but he noticed how she turned slightly away from him when she lifted the veil briefly to take small bites. He began to wonder if there was more to the veil than simple morning customs. Perhaps she was shy about her appearance, Or maybe there was another reason she preferred to keep her face hidden. Over the following weeks, they settled into a routine. Thomas worked the ranch during the day while Alina managed the house and garden. She proved to be an excellent cook and housekeeper, transforming his bachelor quarters into a comfortable home. In the evenings, they would sit in the parlor where Alina would sew or read while Thomas worked on ranch accounts or repaired equipment. Their conversations were polite but limited. Alina asked questions about the ranch and the area, showing interest in understanding her new environment. Thomas shared information about his work, the neighbors, and local customs. But neither of them spoke about personal matters, their pasts, or their feelings about their unusual marriage arrangement. Thomas began to notice small details about Alina. She hummed softly while she worked, always the same melody that sounded like a lullaby. She was left-handed, which made her handwriting distinctive. She was afraid of thunderstorms, staying close to the house when dark clouds gathered. She had a gentle way with the ranch animals, especially the horses, who seemed to trust her immediately. One evening, Mrs. Henderson came to visit. Bringing gossip from town and curiosity about the new Mrs. Walker, Alina served tea and cake in the parlor, handling the social situation with grace despite the awkwardness of the veil. After Mrs. Henderson left, Thomas realized that Alina had managed to answer all the woman's questions without revealing anything personal about herself. "You handled that well," Thomas said. "Mrs. Henderson means well, but she's very curious about everyone's business." "I understand," Alina replied. "Small communities are always interested in newcomers." "I hope I didn't embarrass you." "Not at all," Thomas assured her. "You were perfectly polite." The conversation reminded Thomas that he still knew almost nothing about his wife's background. She had mentioned living in Silver Creek and losing her father, but she never spoke about other family, friends, or her life before coming to his ranch. The veil wasn't just hiding her face, it was hiding everything about who she really was. One night, Thomas woke to the sound of crying coming from Alina's room. The sound was muffled, as if she was trying to be quiet, but the walls of the old house were thin. He lay in his bed, listening to her weep and feeling helpless. He wanted to offer comfort, but they were still strangers despite being married. He didn't know what had caused her tears, or if his interference would be welcome the next morning. Alina appeared at breakfast as usual, showing no signs of the previous night's distress. Her movements were as efficient as always, her voice as polite and controlled. Thomas wanted to ask if she was all right, but something in her manner discouraged personal questions. As autumn approached, Thomas realized their arrangement was working practically, but leaving both of them emotionally isolated. They were like two people living in the same house, but existing in separate worlds. The veil that covered Elena's face had become a symbol of all the barriers between them, and Thomas began to wonder if their marriage would ever become more than a business partnership. Winter arrived early that year, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold winds that howled across the Montana plains. Thomas had to work harder to keep his cattle safe and fed, often staying out until long after dark. Alina would have hot meals waiting for him when he returned, and she had prepared warm clothes and blankets for the harsh season. One particularly severe storm kept Thomas trapped in the barn for most of the day. When he finally made it back to the house, exhausted and half frozen, he found Alina waiting with hot soup, dry clothes, and a fire blazing in the fireplace. She helped him out of his wet coat without a word, her concern evident in the way she moved quickly to make him comfortable. "You shouldn't risk yourself in weather like this," Alina said as she handed him a mug of hot coffee. "The cattle will survive one day without checking on them." "They're my responsibility," Thomas replied. He was grateful for her care, but surprised by the worry in her voice. "I can't just abandon them when they need me most. And what happens to them if you freeze to death out there?" Alina asked, her tone sharper than usual. "Then they'll have no one to care for them at all." Thomas looked at her, startled by the emotion in her voice. For the first time since their marriage, Alina seemed truly upset about something that concerned him personally rather than just household matters. Behind the veil, he could see her shoulders tense with worry. "I didn't realize you were concerned about me," Thomas said quietly. Alina turned away, busying herself with stirring the soup. "Of course I'm concerned. If something happens to you, what becomes of me?" I have nowhere else to go. Her words stung a little, reminding Thomas that their marriage was still primarily a practical arrangement for her. But he had heard something in her voice that suggested her concern went beyond simple self-interest. She had sounded genuinely frightened when she spoke about him freezing to death. As the winter progressed, the isolation of the ranch during the harsh months brought Thomas and Alina into closer contact. They spent more time together in the evenings, sitting by the fire while the wind rattled the windows. Alina began reading aloud from books she had brought with her. Thomas found himself looking forward to these quiet hours. Alina had a beautiful reading voice, clear and expressive. She chose interesting books too, stories about adventure in distant places that made the small parlor feel connected to the wider world. Thomas began to suspect that Alina was more educated than she had let on in her letters. Her choice of books and the way she discussed them suggested someone who had received considerable schooling. One evening, while Alina was reading from a book of poetry, Thomas noticed her hands. They were small and graceful, but he could see faint scars on her fingers and palms. They looked like old burn marks, the kind someone might get from kitchen accidents or working around hot stoves. He wondered about the story behind those scars, but didn't feel comfortable asking. The worst blizzard of the season hit in February, trapping them both inside the house for 3 days. With no ranch work possible, Thomas found himself restless and bored. Alina seemed more comfortable with the confinement, keeping busy with sewing, cooking, and cleaning. But on the second day, Thomas caught her staring out the window with an expression he couldn't read behind the veil. "Do you miss Silver Creek?" Thomas asked, joining her at the window. "Sometimes," Alina admitted, "but not the life I had there. This is better, even with the isolation." "What was your life like there?" Thomas asked gently. It was the most personal question he had asked since their marriage, and he wasn't sure she would answer. Alina was quiet for a long moment. "Difficult," she said finally. "After my father died, there weren't many options for a woman alone. I made the right choice coming here." Thomas wanted to ask more questions, but something in Alina's posture warned him not to push. She had revealed more about herself in those few sentences than in all their previous conversations, and he didn't want to make her retreat further behind her barriers. That night, another sound woke Thomas from his sleep. This time it wasn't crying, but singing. Alina's voice came softly through the walls, the same melody she hummed while working. The words were in Spanish, a language Thomas didn't understand, but the tune was haunting and beautiful. He lay in his bed listening, feeling something shift inside his chest. When the weather finally cleared and Thomas could return to his ranch work, he found himself thinking about Alina constantly. Her concern during the storm, her educated way of speaking, the mysterious scars on her hands, and especially her singing voice in the dark house. He realized he was becoming genuinely curious about the woman he had married. Not just as a practical partner, but as a person with her own story. Spring arrived with sudden warmth and the sound of ice breaking. Up in the creek that ran through Thomas's property, Alina spent more time outside, working in the garden and hanging laundry on the line. Thomas began timing his work so he could catch glimpses of her moving around the yard. Even with the veil, he was starting to recognize her moods and feelings from the way she moved. One afternoon, Thomas returned early from checking fences and saw Alina sitting by the creek, her shoes and stockings off, her feet in the cold water. She had lifted her veil slightly to feel the sun on her face, and Thomas caught a glimpse of her profile before she heard him approaching and quickly lowered the veil. Again, what he saw in that brief moment surprised him. Alina was younger than he had expected, probably in her mid-20s. Her skin was smooth and golden, and she had strong, distinctive features. But what struck him most was a jagged scar that ran along her left cheek, from her ear almost to her mouth. The scar was old and well-healed, but it was clearly the reason for the veil. Thomas pretended he hadn't seen anything, but his mind raced with questions. How had Alina been injured? Was the scar the reason she preferred to keep her face covered, rather than mourning customs? He felt a surge of anger toward whoever or whatever had hurt her, followed by a strange protective instinct he hadn't expected. That evening at dinner, Thomas found himself studying Alina more carefully. Now that he knew about the scar, He could see how she positioned herself to keep the left side of her face turned away from him. Her careful movements and constant awareness of the veil's position suddenly made more sense. Thomas realized that Alina had been protecting herself from his judgment and possible rejection. She had married a stranger and moved to an isolated ranch. All while hiding what she probably thought was a disfiguring injury. The courage that must have taken impressed him more than anything else she had done, as he watched his wife move gracefully around the kitchen. When Thomas felt something new stirring in his chest, it wasn't just curiosity or admiration anymore. Despite the veil and the barriers between them, despite knowing almost nothing about her past, he was beginning to develop real feelings for Alina. The practical marriage arrangement was turning into something neither of them had planned for, and Thomas wasn't sure what to do about it. Thomas began changing his behavior in small ways, trying to show Alina that his feelings toward her were shifting. He started bringing her wildflowers from his rides around the ranch, leaving them on the kitchen table without explanation. He repaired the broken swing on the front porch, thinking she might enjoy sitting outside in the evenings. He even bought fabric in town when Alina mentioned needing new curtains, though he had never paid attention to household decorations before. Alina seemed puzzled by these gestures, but accepted them graciously. She arranged the wildflowers in mason jars around the house and did sit on the repaired swing sometimes in the late afternoons. Thomas would find excuses to work near the house during these times, enjoying the domestic scene even if they didn't talk much. One evening in late spring, Thomas decided to take a risk. "Alina," he said after dinner, "would you like to learn to ride? I could teach you, and then you could come with me sometimes when I check the far pastures." Alina looked up from her sewing, and Thomas could sense her surprise even behind the veil. "I don't know," she said hesitantly. "I've never been on a horse. I have a gentle mare that would be perfect for a beginner," Thomas pressed. "It might be nice for you to see more of the ranch, and you wouldn't have to spend so much time alone." After a moment, Alina nodded. "I would like that. Thank you for offering." The riding lessons began the next week. Thomas chose his most patient horse, a brown mare named Belle. Started Alina with basic instructions on how to approach and handle the animal. Alina was nervous at first, but she had a natural gentleness that the horse responded to well. Thomas found himself enjoying the lessons more than he had expected. Teaching Alina gave him legitimate reasons to stand close to her, to guide her hands, and to watch her gain confidence with each session. Alina was a quick learner, and within a few weeks, she was riding confidently around the yard. The first time Alina rode out with Thomas to check cattle, she was quiet and observant, taking in the vastness of the ranch and the beauty of the landscape. Thomas showed her the boundaries of his property, the different pastures, and the places where he hoped to expand in the future. Alina asked intelligent questions about the ranch operations and seemed genuinely interested in understanding his work. "It's beautiful out here," Alina said as they sat on their horses overlooking a valley where cattle grazed peacefully. "I never imagined land could stretch so far without any towns or people. Does it make you feel lonely?" Thomas asked. "No," Alina replied, surprising him. "It makes me feel free." In Silver Creek, everyone knew everyone's business. There was no privacy, no space to just exist without being watched and judged. Thomas heard pain in her voice and wondered again about her past. "Was it very difficult for you there?" Alina was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her words came slowly. "After the accident that killed my father and gave me this," she touched her veiled cheek, "people looked at me differently. Some with pity, others with disgust. I couldn't go anywhere without feeling their stares." "What kind of accident?" Thomas asked gently. "A fire," Alina said simply. "Our house burned down one night. My father died trying to save me, and I barely survived. The scars on my face and hands are reminders of that night." Thomas felt a deep sadness for what Alina had endured. "I'm sorry," he said. "That must have been terrible." "It was," Alina agreed. "But it taught me that life can change completely in one moment. That's why I decided to answer your advertisement. I wanted a chance to start over somewhere no one knew my story." Thomas wanted to tell her that her scars wouldn't matter to him. He was beginning to care about her as a person regardless of her appearance. But he sensed that Alina wasn't ready to hear those words yet. Instead, he said, "I'm glad you chose to come here. You've made this place feel like a real home." Alina turned to look at him, and even behind the veil, Thomas could feel the intensity of her gaze. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more to me than you know." As summer progressed, Thomas and Alina spent more time together. She accompanied him on ranch work several times a week, proving to be helpful with tasks that required patience and gentleness, like treating injured animals or training young horses. Alina had a natural way with creatures that were hurt or scared, probably because she understood what it felt like to be vulnerable. Thomas began to see Alina's true personality emerging. She was intelligent and observant, with a dry sense of humor that surprised him. She was also braver than he had realized. Willing to help with dangerous work like treating sick cattle or chasing stray animals back to the herd. The woman who had seemed so fragile and mysterious in their early correspondences was revealing herself to be strong and capable. One afternoon, while they were working together to repair a damaged fence, a rattlesnake appeared near Alina's feet. Without thinking, Thomas threw himself between Alina and the snake, knocking her backward and killing the snake with a large rock. In the scramble, Alina's veil was partially pulled away, and Thomas got his clearest look yet at her scarred face. The injury was significant, running from her left ear to the corner of her mouth, but Thomas found himself thinking that Alina was still beautiful. Her eyes were large and expressive, her bone structure elegant. And the scar didn't diminish her attractiveness as much as she obviously believed it did. Alina quickly readjusted her veil, but not before Thomas saw her flush with embarrassment and fear. She was clearly waiting for his reaction, expecting him to be shocked or repulsed. "Are you hurt?" Thomas asked, focusing on her safety rather than her appearance. "Did the snake get close to you?" "No," Alina replied, her voice shaking slightly. "Thank you for protecting me, of course," Thomas said simply. "I couldn't let anything happen to you." Alina studied him for a moment, as if trying to understand whether his behavior toward her would change now that he had seen her face more clearly. When Thomas continued treating her exactly as he had before, helping her to her feet and checking to make sure she wasn't injured, Alina seemed to relax slightly. That evening, Thomas realized that his feelings for Alina had deepened into something much stronger than he had expected when he placed that marriage advertisement. He was falling in love with his wife, not despite the mystery and barriers between them, but because of who she was as a person, her intelligence, courage, kindness, and the strength that had taken her to build a new life. Despite her painful past, had won his heart completely. Challenge now would be helping Alina understand that his feelings were real and that her scars didn't matter to him. Thomas sensed that Alina had feelings for him too, but her past experiences had taught her to expect rejection and judgment. Winning her trust completely would require patience and persistence. But Thomas was determined to show her that their practical marriage could become something beautiful and lasting. Thomas decided he needed to show Alina his true feelings, but he wanted to do it carefully. He began by making small changes in how he spoke to her, using her name more often and asking for her opinions on ranch decisions. He started sitting closer to her during their evening conversations and finding reasons to touch her hand briefly when passing dishes at dinner. Alina seemed to notice these changes, becoming more talkative and relaxed around him. She began sharing stories about books she had read and places she hoped to visit someday. Thomas learned that Alina had taught school for a few years before her father's death, which explained her education and love of reading. She had dreams of traveling to cities like Denver and San Francisco, though she spoke of them as impossible fantasies. One evening in August, Thomas made a decision that surprised them both. "Alina," he said after dinner, "I've been thinking about taking some cattle to market in Denver this fall. It's something I usually do alone, but I wondered if you might like to come with me. You mentioned wanting to see the city?" Alina's hand stilled on her sewing. "You would want me to come with you?" "I would like your company," Thomas said honestly. "The trip takes about 2 weeks. We could spend a few extra days in the city if you wanted to see the sights. But people would see me," Alina said quietly. "In a big city, with all those strangers?" Thomas leaned forward in his chair. "Alina, I've seen your face. The scar doesn't change how I feel about you. If others choose to stare, that's their problem, not yours. Elena was quiet for a long moment. How do you feel about me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been working toward for months. I care about you very much. More than I expected when we first arranged this marriage. You've become important to me, Elena, not just as a wife in name, but as a person I truly value. Elena set down her sewing and turned to face him fully. Even behind the veil, Thomas could sense her emotional struggle. I care about you too, she admitted. But I'm afraid of what? Of letting myself hope for more than I should. Of believing this could be a real marriage instead of just an arrangement. Thomas stood and walked to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were at eye level. It already is more than an arrangement, at least for me. I know we started this as a practical matter, but my feelings have changed completely. Elena raised her hands to her veil, hesitating. What if you're wrong? What if you see me clearly and change your mind? I won't, Thomas said firmly. But I want you to decide when you're ready. I don't want you to feel pressured. Elena's hands trembled as she slowly lifted the veil from her face. In the lamplight, Thomas could see her clearly for the first time since their wedding night. The scar was prominent, but her eyes were beautiful, large and dark brown with thick lashes. Her mouth was soft and full, and her skin had a warm, golden tone. Thomas thought she was lovely. You're beautiful, Thomas said simply. Elena searched his face for signs of insincerity or politeness. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it to be kind, Thomas replied. I'm saying it because it's true. You are beautiful, Elena. The scar is part of you, but it doesn't define you or diminish your beauty. Elena's eyes filled with tears. In Silver Creek, children would run from me. Men would look away. Women would whisper about how tragic it was. Then they were fools, Amma said, reaching up to gently touch her unscarred cheek. You are brave and intelligent and kind. You work harder than any person I know. You've made my house into a home and my life richer than it ever was before. Anyone who can't see your value isn't worth worrying about. Elena leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. I want to believe you, then believe me, Thomas said. Come to Denver with me. Let me show you off as my wife. Let me prove that I'm proud to be married to you. Elena opened her eyes and looked at him steadily. All right, she said. I'll come with you. Thomas smiled and leaned forward to kiss her forehead gently. It was the first kiss of their marriage. It felt like a new beginning. Over the next few weeks, Elena began leaving her veil off when they were alone together. Thomas loved being able to see her expressions clearly, to watch her smile when she was amused, and to see the way her eyes lit up when she talked about things that interested her. Elena seemed more relaxed and confident without the barrier of the veil between them. They began talking more intimately about their past lives and future hopes. Elena told Thomas about her childhood, her years teaching school, and the night of the fire that changed everything. Thomas shared his own history, his struggles to build the ranch, and his loneliness before she arrived. I used to think marriage was just about practical partnership, Thomas admitted one evening as they sat together on the porch swing. I never understood people who talked about love and romance. And now? Elena asked. Now I understand, Thomas said, taking her hand. This feeling I have for you, it's not just partnership or companionship. It's something much deeper. Elena squeezed his hand. I love you too, Thomas. I never thought I would be able to say those words to anyone. Thomas turned to face her fully. Elena Walker, I love you completely. Your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, your beauty, all of you. Elena smiled, and Thomas thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. I love you too, Thomas Walker. More than I thought possible. They kissed then, properly and deeply, sealing the transformation of their practical arrangement into a true marriage based on love and understanding as they prepared for the trip to Denver. Thomas watched Elena's confidence grow daily. She ordered new clothes from the catalog, including dresses in colors other than black. She practiced styling her hair in fashionable ways and even bought a small hat instead, with a heavy veil. Elena was still nervous about facing crowds of strangers, but she was determined to try. Thomas's love and acceptance had given her the courage to stop hiding from the world. She was ready to be Thomas Walker's wife in every sense, and he was proud to claim her as the woman he loved. The practical marriage that had begun with a newspaper advertisement and a veiled stranger had become the love story neither Thomas nor Alina had dared to hope for. The journey to Denver took 5 days by wagon, with Thomas driving a small herd of his best cattle and Alina riding alongside him. She had packed her few belongings carefully, including several new dresses and the small hat she planned to wear in the city. Thomas had arranged for 2 of his ranch hands to help drive the cattle, giving him more time to spend with Alina during the trip. Alina was nervous the first day, especially when they stopped at way stations where other travelers stared at her scar. But Thomas stayed close beside her, introducing her proudly as his wife and making it clear that he expected her to be treated with respect. His confidence in her began to rub off, and by the 3rd day, Alina was holding her head high and meeting people's eyes directly. "You're getting braver," Thomas observed as they made camp one evening. "I'm learning that most people are more curious than cruel," Alina replied. "And the ones who are cruel don't matter, because I have you." Thomas pulled her close as they sat by the campfire. "You'll always have me, Alina. I want you to remember that when we get to the city and there are more people around." Denver was bigger and busier than Alina had imagined. The streets were crowded with wagons, horses, and people rushing in all directions. Buildings rose several stories high, and there were shops selling everything from fancy clothing to exotic foods. Alina found herself fascinated by the energy and variety of city life. Thomas sold his cattle quickly to a buyer he had worked with before, getting a good price that put him in an excellent mood. He booked them into the best hotel in the city, a luxury that made Alina's eyes widen with surprise and delight. Their room had wallpaper, gas lighting, and a private bathroom with running water. "Thomas, this is too expensive," Alina protested as she looked around the elegant room. "Nothing is too expensive for my wife," Thomas replied, enjoying her amazement. "Besides, this is partly a honeymoon trip. We never had a proper wedding celebration." Alina blushed prettily. "I've never stayed anywhere this fancy." "Neither have I," Thomas admitted. "But I wanted to give you something special." They spent 3 days exploring Denver together. Thomas bought Alina new clothes, including a beautiful blue dress that brought out her eyes and a matching hat with ribbons. Alina insisted on visiting the library and bookstore, where she selected several novels to take back to the ranch. They ate at restaurants, attended a theater performance, and walked through parks where Alina marveled at the cultivated gardens. Alina received some stares because of her scar, but many people simply smiled and nodded politely. Thomas noticed that Alina was gradually becoming more comfortable being seen in public. She stopped trying to hide the left side of her face and began engaging in conversations with shopkeepers and other women at the hotel. On their last evening in Denver, Thomas took Alina to the finest restaurant in the city. Alina wore her new blue dress and had styled her hair in an elegant arrangement. She looked beautiful and confident, nothing like the frightened, veiled woman who had stepped off the stagecoach a year ago. "I have something for you," Thomas said. Reaching into his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box and placed it on the table. Alina opened it to find a simple but elegant gold necklace with a small diamond pendant. "Thomas, it's beautiful. But you've already spent too much money on this trip." "It's not about the money," Thomas said. "When we got married, I didn't give you an engagement ring or wedding gift. This is to make up for that, and to show everyone that you're my beloved wife. It's not just a practical arrangement." Alina's eyes filled with tears. "Help me put it on?" Thomas fastened the necklace around Alina's neck, letting his hands linger on her shoulders. "Perfect," he said. "It looks beautiful on you." Alina touched the pendant gently. "I'll treasure it always, Alina," Thomas said, taking her hands across the table. "I want to ask you something important." Alina nodded, waiting. "When we get back to the ranch, I'd like us to start sharing a bedroom, as a real married couple. If you're ready for that," Alina smiled, her cheeks pink with happiness and embarrassment. "I've been hoping you would ask." "Yes, Thomas. I'm ready to be your wife in every way." The trip back to the ranch felt different from their journey to Denver. Alina chatted icily about everything they had seen and done, making plans for improvements to their house and garden. She talked about books she wanted to order and recipes she wanted to try. Thomas loved seeing her excited about their future together. When they reached home, Alina immediately began making changes that reflected her new confidence. She hung her veil in the back of a closet, replacing it with the pretty hats Thomas had bought her in Denver. She rearranged the parlor to make it more comfortable for entertaining in case neighbors came to visit. She even wrote a letter to Mrs. Henderson, inviting her for tea and conversation. Alina moved her belongings into Thomas's bedroom, transforming the space into something that belonged to both of them. She added feminine touches like embroidered pillowcases and fresh flowers, while keeping the practical, comfortable atmosphere Thomas preferred. The room became a symbol of their successful merger of two separate lives into one shared existence. Their physical relationship developed naturally and beautifully. Alina had been worried that her scars might make Thomas less attracted to her, but he proved repeatedly that he found her desirable exactly as she was. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, deepening the emotional bond they had built over months of getting to know each other. As autumn returned, Thomas and Alina settled into their new life as a truly married couple. Alina no longer hid her face or her past. When neighbors visited, she served them graciously and spoke openly about her background and her journey to Montana. Most people admired her courage and strength, and those who didn't simply weren't invited back. Alina also began teaching reading and writing to some of the local children whose families lived too far from town to attend school regularly. Her old dream of teaching was fulfilled in a new way, and the children adored her patient, kind instruction. Parents were grateful for Alina's help and impressed by her education and dedication. Thomas expanded his ranch operations, using some of the profits from the Denver cattle sale to buy more land and livestock. Alina proved to be an excellent business partner, helping with record-keeping and offering practical suggestions for improving their operations. Together, they were building something larger and more successful than either could have achieved alone. One evening in late fall, as they sat together by the fire, Alina made an announcement that filled Thomas with joy. "I think I'm going to have a baby," she said quietly. Thomas jumped up and swept her into his arms, spinning her around the room. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure," Alina laughed. "Are you happy about it?" "I'm thrilled," Thomas said, kissing her thoroughly. "Our baby will be lucky to have you for a mother." Alina touched her still flat stomach wonderingly. "I never thought I would have a family. I thought my scars meant I would always be alone." "You're not alone," Thomas said firmly. "You have me, and soon we'll have our child, and maybe more children after that." "We're a family, Alina." As they stood together in their warm, comfortable home, Alina reflected on the amazing journey that had brought her from despair in Silver Creek to happiness and love on Thomas's ranch. The advertisement that had seemed like her last desperate hope had turned out to be the doorway to everything she had ever wanted. Thomas held his wife close, marveling at how much his life had changed since he decided to place that marriage advertisement. He had thought he was looking for a practical partner to help with household duties, but instead, he had found the love of his life, a woman whose courage and strength inspired him every day. The veiled stranger who had stepped off the stagecoach had become the heart of his home and the center of his world. Their love story had begun with necessity and blossomed into something beautiful and lasting, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances on the unknown.